It's the 9th of February 1966. A man urgently dials the British High Commission number in Uganda, urgently pleading for arms to defend his kingdom. Now, little did he know that this desperate move would ignite a power struggle with a far-reaching consequence. This clash of power would culminate in the infamous attack on Lubiri Mengo, the seat of the Buganda kingdom, marking the beginning of the Kabaka crisis of 1966, which saw a war between the Kabaka of Buganda, Sir Edward Mutesa II, and the Prime Minister of Uganda, Dr. Milton Obote. In this episode of Uganda in History, we unravel the events surrounding the Kabaka crisis, exploring how the conflict led to the exile of the Kabaka, Sir Edward Mutesa II, to Britain, and the Prime Minister, Dr. Milton Obote, assuming absolute power. It's 1960 and Milton Obote is making moves in Uganda. He's establishing the Uganda's People's Congress UPC with an aim of shaking things up by challenging the grip of the Mengo establishment, a group of traditionalist Baganda leading the Buganda kingdom. Now, the Mengo crew wasn't exactly a united front. Rivalries and infighting were their daily drama, but they did share a common dislike for the Democratic Party DP, mainly because it was dominated by Catholics. Now enter the DP, winning the first free national elections in 1961 and forming a government that both the UPC and the Baganda weren't thrilled about. Now, despite having completely different ideas, the UPC decided to send in Grace Ibingira, a conservative member, to cozy up things with the Baganda for an alliance against the DP. Why? Well, because he had a direct line to the Kabaka of Buganda, Sir Edward Mutesa II. Now, after some intense negotiations and a bit of political matchmaking, the UPC and the Baganda leaders strike a deal. The Kabaka Yeka, a traditionalist party, was born out of this unexpected alliance, ready to take on the political scene. Now, fast forward to April 1962 and UPC secures victory in the general elections. Obote, the man with the plan, is now tasked with forming a government. He goes on to become the Prime Minister of the UPC-KY coalition, with Obote snagging control of the security services and the armed forces. Uganda officially would cut ties with the United Kingdom on October 9, 1962, and the Kabaka, Sir Edward Mutesa II, would go on to learn the role of the ceremonial position of the president, which was a strategic move made by Obote to keep the Baganda population happy. So let's rewind to 1964. When Grace Ibingira decides it's time to play a long game. He's got his eyes on the big prize, kicking Obote out of the UPC presidency. Now, at an April party conference, Ibingira goes head-on-head with the left-leaning John Kakonge for the Secretary-General position of the UPC party. And guess what? With Obote in his corner, Ibingira manages to oust Kakonge just by 2 votes. Now, with this new position, Ibingira would go on full force, purging the party of leftist members. And meanwhile, Mutesa the Kabaka starts getting nervous that the UPC would mess up with the kingdom's autonomy. So he decides to shake things up, instructing the Baganda members of parliament to join the UPC and boost Ibingira's position. Now, as Ibingira's ties with Mutesa grew stronger, he builds a coalition of non-Bagandan Southerners, dubbed the Bantu Group. On the other side of the ring, Obote is not sitting idle as well. He's reaching out to members of the DP in parliament, trying to sway them to defect and join his party in parliament. Under the guise of checking on his ranch in Ankole, he jets off to the United States of America, raising funds to support his anti-socialist causes. And you bet, he uses the money to expand his influence upon his return in a classic political power move. Now, by 1965, it is crystal clear that the UPC is split into 2 factions, one led by Obote and another led by Grace Ibingira. Now, when Grace Ibingira tried to convene a UPC conference as the party secretary general, the police would go on to shut it down. So, we have got Uganda gaining independence on October 9, 1962, turning into a republic within the British Commonwealth in March 1963. Now, Parliament pulls the surprise move, electing Mutesa as the non-executive president and Obote as the executive prime minister. Now we rewind to the Lancaster Conference in London just before the big independence conference. Bunyoro steps up, demanding the return of the 2 lost counties annexed to Buganda by the British in the 19th century after some intense wars between Buganda and Bunyoro. Now here was the deal. Independence in 1962 and a few years later, a referendum in 1964 would let the people in those 2 counties decide whether they wanted to join Bunyoro or stick with Buganda. Now meanwhile, the Kabaka had a plan to settle 1,000 of Buganda people in those 2 counties so that when the voting day comes, they would vote in favor to remain within Buganda. Now, the 1962 constitution grants Buganda federal autonomy, but it doesn't resolve the territorial disputes of Buyaga and Bugangaizi, which were the two lost counties Bunyoro Kingdom was demanding for. So on August 25, 1964, Obote throws in a curveball, submitting a bill for referendum to settle the matter. Now here is where it gets intense. Mutesa wants the territories to stay within Buganda, while Obote wants them to go back to Bunyoro. Now the referendum goes down on November 4, 1964, and by a landslide, the voters choose to return to Bunyoro. Now an outrage would go on in Buganda with riots and attack on kingdom officials. The Katikiro, Michael Chintu, would throw in the towel and resigns on November 9th, being replaced by Joash Mayanja Nkanji. Now conservative Ganja chiefs are rallying behind Mutesa, encouraging him to resist Obote. Now when Obote hands over the documents for the transfer of jurisdiction, Mutesa drops a bombshell and says, "I can never give away Buganda land." Obote would sign in his place and the tensions between the two would hit the roof. So on January 1st, 1965, the transfer of the jurisdiction would go on to take effect. So in the late 1964, the Ugandan government decides to play a risky game, offering a secret support to Christopher Mbenje, who was leading a rebellion in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo, right next door to Uganda. Now this included direct military assistance from the Ugandan army, but here is where the catch comes in. It causes a major split within the Ugandan cabinet. Now in February 1965, things even become murkier. A colonel named Idi Amin Dada, a high-ranking officer within the Ugandan army, opens an account with the Ottoman Bank, and within 24 days, a whopping 340,000 Ugandan shilling gets deposited. Now the KY MP Daudi Ocheng drops a bombshell during the parliament session, accusing Amin of acquiring the money illegally during the army operations in support of Mbenje. He even throws in allegations of profiting off illegally obtained gold, ivory, and coffee from Congo. It's a parliamentary drama at its finest. Now the government promises to investigate, but by December, no action was taken. So Ocheng doesn't let it slide. In a closed parliament session, he pushes for a motion urging the government to act. Obote assures progress, but Ocheng isn't convinced. So fast forward to January 1966, Ocheng reintroduces his motion, frustrated by the delays in the publishing of the investigation report. Obote, trying to manage the chaos, explains the delay in the secret meeting with the UPC parliamentary group. The decision was that all UPC MPs should reject the Ocheng motion, citing insensitivity national security information. Now meanwhile, Obote takes a trip to northern Uganda, leaving the government to hastily meet without him. Now this would result into a resolution that all UPC MPs should support the Ocheng's motion. Now the Ocheng motion would hit the parliament floor, accusing Amin and pointing fingers at Obote, Onama, and Adokoneikon. Now the intense debate ends up with the resolution to suspend Amin pending investigation, with only one vote dissenting against it. But here is the twist. The sudden reversal by the cabinet leaves the MPs in the dark, following the government's direction. Now next on the drama menu, Onama places Amin on a short leave of absence and a commission is appointed to investigate. Obote would go on to return to Kampala and tries to stop the investigation, but ends up arresting 5 cabinet ministers. Obote would go on to accuse Mutesa of plotting a coup and reshuffles the military positions and appoints his own judges to investigate the gold scandal allegations. Now on April 5, 1966, Obote pulls another surprise move. He surrounds the National Assembly Parliament in Uganda with army tanks and demands the members to pass a constitution that they haven't seen or even debated before, which came to be known as the infamous Pigeonhole Constitution. As the political storm rages on, Daudi Ocheng, the man behind the motion, is diagnosed with stomach cancer in the United Kingdom. He heads over to London for treatment and returns to Uganda and suddenly passes away on June 1, 1966. Now the true cause of his death remains a mystery, adding another layer to the intrigue of the tumultuous chapter in the Ugandan history. Now on February 24, 1966, Obote drops a bombshell, announcing the suspension of Mutesa from his presidential duties. Obote cites Mutesa's reaction to the Lost Counties referendum, his troop movement without ministerial consultations, and his attempt to seek foreign military support. Now Mutesa would fight back, ordering Obote to leave the Bugandan soil and appealing to the UN Secretary General for intervention. Now let's rewind a bit. Before the storm in 1966, Obote decides to beef up his military arsenal. He imports arms from China, with the crates mysteriously marked the Matoke consignment. Now the Kenyan President Jomo Kenyatta intercepts the arms, but under the diplomatic pressure, he releases them. At the time, Obote's confidant, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, was Kenya's vice president, working closely with him. Now, fast forward to May 22nd, 1966, Obote calls a meeting at the Presidential Lodge in Kampala, bringing in the Minister of Defense, the Minister of Interior, and the Inspector General of the Police. Now, after discussing the crisis, Obote declares that the situation requires a military involvement. He then picks up the phone and calls Idi Amin Dada and instructs him to launch an attack on Mutesa's palace the next morning. Now, on that fateful morning, around 8 a.m., Sir Edward Mutesa II, the Kabaka of Uganda, finds himself in the palace of Mengo, anticipating an imminent attack of the kingdom. Now, fully aware of Obote's plan, now Mutesa, with the contingent of royal armed soldiers, prepares to repulse the attack. Now, as Obote's army strikes, a fierce battle would ensue, reportedly lasting several hours. Now, Mutesa, drawing on the military training from the Queen's Grenadier Guards in the United Kingdom, he leads his forces in defending the kingdom. Now, in a call to his subjects for support, many respond with acts of sabotage throughout Uganda. Now, monarchists attempt to set blockades to hinder Amin's troops and engage in street clashes. However, the Kabaka's bodyguards were armed with hunting rifles, which were not a match to the army's unit. Now, 2 days after the palace is surrounded, overrun, and set ablaze, the Kabaka Sir Edward Mutesa II manages to escape during the cloudburst in the middle of the battle. Now, Mutesa, seeking refuge, stops a passing taxi cab and directs the driver to take him to Rubaga Cathedral, where he finds the two priests, including Emmanuel Wamala and Emmanuel Nsubuga, having a breakfast. Now, after explaining their situation, they provide him with critical robes and arrange for a driver to take him to Busiro County. Now, meanwhile, volunteers carry over 200 bodies of fallen Ugandan soldiers to the morgue, while the military buries countless others in mass graves.
Mr. President, have you any news of the whereabouts of the Kabaka?
That question, I understand, has been asked already in the press and elsewhere, but I do not know why you should ask me that question now. But the most interesting thing is that the pressmen seem to think that the Kabaka has done nothing wrong. That it's only the government that has done wrong things.
Well, it was a fight, and we had to fight our way out. But you please forgive me if I don't make too long a statement tonight, because of the overwhelming sort of circumstances of my welcome and pleasure of being here, and that I've been through sort of a long, harassing experience. But I have recently had a trying experience. I hope that you will forgive me if I make this short statement to you.
Now, as the smoke cleared and the echoes of the battle lingered, the aftermath of the Buganda crisis unfolded with the heart-wrenching consequences. Now, within days, the Kabaka, along with his two bodyguards, managed to cross the border to Burundi, entering into a life of exile. Now, after brief stays in Nairobi and Addis Ababa, he found asylum in the United Kingdom, where he remained there until his mysterious death in 1969. Now, back in Buganda, the repercussions were severe. Various Baganda chiefs and members of the royal family and those perceived as loyal to the Baganda found themselves imprisoned. Now, the Lubiri Palace, a symbol of Buganda's rich history, was completely destroyed during the infighting and the subsequent looting. Now, in a twist of fate, Kabaka Mutesa II, who died in exile, was granted an opportunity to be buried in Buganda by the new president, Idi Amin Dada. Now, Amin, the ever-strategist, propagated a narrative portraying him as a Muslim boy from the outskirts, challenging the Christian leaders of the Ugandan dominant tribe. Now, the crisis triggered a number of legal battles against Obote's government. Members of the Mengo establishment, incarcerated by the new regime, sought release through lawsuits. Now, the Chief Justice Sir Igbert Udo Unduma, in his decision for Uganda versus the Commissioner of Prison, he granted their release. However, when the Buganda government petitioned for the court to declare Obote's actions invalid, Unduma ruled that the coup was a legitimate means for assuming power under the international law. He reaffirmed that Obote's government was legal and the new constitution was deemed in force. Now, the former cabinet ministers initially arrested and later released were rearrested outside the courthouse in Buganda under the colonial emergency resolutions. Now, the government would go on to pass the Deportation Act to justify its actions, which would go on to lead to another legal tussle. Now, although the ministers were initially released, they remained incarcerated until Amin seized power in 1971. Now, in the aftermath of the crisis, Obote consolidated his power by fostering support within the military, utilizing patronage and increasing the defense expenditure in the 1966 budget. Those soldiers loyal during the crisis were duly rewarded, and the year 1967 witnessed the introduction of the Third Constitution, signalizing the abolition of all traditional kingdoms. Now, the echoes of the 1966 crisis continue to resonate through the years, and many Baganda collectively hold Obote accountable for the tumultuous events that unfolded, blaming him for both the disestablishment of the Buganda kingdom and the Kabaka Mutesa II's forced exile. Now, the wounds inflicted during the period ran deep through the hearts of the Buganda people. Now, the aftermath of the 1966 revolution left a trail of tragedies, consuming its main players. Mutesa met his demise in exile in London in November 1969 with the suspicion of poisoning by Obote's secret agents lingering in the air. Now, Obote himself first exiled and passed away in Zambia in 2005, having been overthrown twice by his own army. Now, Uganda's unique historical landscape unfolds, revealing a nation that has witnessed 9 presidents since independence. Notably, 5 of them ascended to power through the use of the gun, while 5 were deposed by the gun as well. Now, the Mengo crisis of 1966, a pivotal turning point, altered the course of Uganda's politics. Now, had it not occurred, general elections were slated for 1967 and 1972. However, by 1972, Idi Amin had already seized power, ushering in a military rule by toppling Obote. Now, amidst the political turmoil, soldiers were accused of perpetrating atrocities against the defenseless citizens. Now, reports of killings, lootings, rapes, and torture tarnished the legacy of the military interventions. Now, scores of the kingdom royalists and the loyalists faced arrest and imprisonment without trial. Now, as the Lubiri Palace lay in ruins, a parallel sentiment rose among the Baganda people, with their resentment towards Obote intensified. Now, the scars of the 1966 crisis left a mark on the hearts and the minds of many, shaping the Uganda's complex and tumultuous journey through its evolving history. So if you found this video informative and engaging, don't forget to give it a like, share, and subscribe to help the channel grow. This has been Regan for Uganda in History, and see you in another video.